When we look at the price of goods, we easily accept that they are governed by the market. Yet we rarely apply that same cold logic to our own futures. The wages we earn, the price of our human labor, are dictated by the exact same market mechanisms. Based on Chapter 15 of Professor Lee Jung-goo's Microeconomics, we are going to dissect exactly how the prices of the factors of production are determined. Directly addressing the audience, how exactly is the number on your paycheck calculated? That number is not arbitrary. It is the output of strict microeconomic laws weighing supply, demand, and a precise calculation of your economic contribution. In the overall labor market on the right, supply meets demand to establish the equilibrium wage, W star. But zooming in on a single firm on the left, the geometry changes. It faces a perfectly horizontal, infinitely elastic supply curve at that exact W star wage. This happens because an individual firm is a price taker. A price taker is an agent too small to influence the market price, meaning the firm must accept the wage dictated by the broader market. Looking back at the chart, the firm's downward-sloping demand curve intersects this horizontal supply line. At this specific intersection, the firm decides to hire exactly L star amount of labor. For an individual employer, the price of a factor of production is an exogenous constant, handed down by the immense forces of the macroscopic market. At this equilibrium point, the wage perfectly matches the height of its demand curve. This relationship brings us directly to the marginal productivity theory. The theory states that a factor of production earns a reward equal to the exact value it adds. Therefore, the wage equals the value of marginal product of labor, or VMPL. VMPL is the physical output of one additional worker multiplied by the market price of the good they produce. This raises an obvious question. In the real world, does every worker actually receive a wage perfectly aligned with their fair contribution? The massive wage polarization we observe today breaks from this neat theoretical equilibrium. To understand why, we look to the skill-biased technological change hypothesis. As computers and automation expanded, demand for unskilled labor plummeted. Simultaneously, demand for highly skilled workers to operate these technologies surged, widening the wage gap. Economist Daron Acemoglu analyzed 60 years of shifts, concluding that modern technology inherently favors skilled labor, making it the primary driver of recent income inequality. The clean logic of marginal productivity is continually warped by the massive external variable of technological progress, resulting in deep structural inequality. Let's move past market inequality and put a single worker's paycheck under the microscope to dissect its actual components. This chart illustrates the basic labor market. To keep a worker from leaving, an employer must pay a minimum amount. The height of the supply curve represents this minimum. The blue area beneath the curve is called transfer earnings. Transfer earnings are defined as the minimum payment necessary to keep a factor of production tied to its current employment. It represents the exact monetary equivalent of a worker's opportunity cost. A portion of your salary is not a reward for your brilliant performance. It is simply the baseline financial defense required to stop you from taking your skills elsewhere. However, the market does not negotiate minimums with every single individual. It pays the universal equilibrium wage, W star, to everyone currently employed. Because of this universal rate, workers whose personal minimum requirements are lower than the market wage receive surplus compensation. This red area above the supply curve but below the wage line is called economic rent. You might wonder why economists use the term rent for labor, rather than restricting it to real estate and landlords. The term traces back to classical economists like Henry George. He observed that traditional rent was the payment made to a factor of production, specifically land, whose total supply was completely fixed, regardless of the price offered. Modern microeconomics expands this concept. The more inelastic or fixed supply is, excessive its economic rent becomes. Watch the chart. As the supply curve becomes perfectly vertical, reaching zero elasticity, opportunity cost vanishes. Every dollar paid becomes pure economic rent. This mathematically explains the astronomical incomes of elite athletes and entertainers. Their unique talents cannot be mass-produced. They have a highly inelastic supply, meaning almost their entire income consists of economic rent. The wealth accumulated by specialized professionals, like doctors or lawyers, operates on the exact same mechanism. Difficult licensing exams act as artificial barriers, keeping the supply curve incredibly steep, and generating massive economic rent for those who make it through. Up until now, we have examined labor, which is a freely variable input. We now shift our focus to the short run, looking at fixed inputs like heavy factory machinery, whose quantities cannot be immediately changed. Because you cannot add or subtract a fraction of a factory floor on a whim, the concept of calculating a variable marginal product for that specific piece of equipment completely breaks down. This creates a structural dilemma. If we cannot measure its marginal contribution, how do we determine the correct compensation for this fixed equipment in the short term? Looking at a firm's short-run cost curves, economists solve this by subtraction. We take the total revenue rectangle and subtract the variable costs. The remaining blue area in the middle is assigned to fixed inputs. We call this quasi-rent. It acts exactly like economic rent, but only temporarily. Quasi-rent is the residual payment captured by factors of production whose supply is fixed solely in the short run. Do not confuse that large blue rectangle with pure economic profit. Returning to the chart, we split that quasi-rent in two. The bottom covers the opportunity cost of fixed inputs. Only the top represents actual profit. Consider a scenario where market prices drop sharply, turning that top profit section negative. The firm is now operating at a loss. Even in the red, a firm will usually keep the factory running. As long as the market price stays above average variable costs, the total quasi-rent remains positive. The firm is at least paying off a portion of its fixed equipment costs, making survival mathematically viable. The absolute limit, the shutdown point, occurs precisely when quasi-rent drops to zero or goes negative. In the short run, corporate survival is not dictated by vague notions of overall profitability. It is governed entirely by the cold, mathematical size of the firm's quasi-rent. We've examined the precise mechanisms behind compensation, the baseline value of marginal product, the massive surpluses of economic rent, and the short-term metric of quasi-rent. As artificial intelligence and robotics rapidly replace traditional human functions, the rules of this factor market are aggressively compressing. Moving forward, will your compensation be strictly limited to the baseline value of your marginal product, or will you possess a skill so irreplaceable that you command massive economic rent? In a rapidly shifting economy, the only variable you can truly control is your own elasticity of supply. Consider your opportunity cost and decide what your output is worth.